Hi, folks. Welcome. We'll get started momentarily. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. Start in a minute. Welcome, folks. We'll get started shortly. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today in our webinar, Climate Resilience in Conversation. We're thrilled to have you here. Next slide, please. My name is Sophie Loeb, and I'm a policy analyst here at the Center for Progressive Reform. If you have any audio problems, you can attend the webinar by phone with the ID listed here. All participants will be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions for our panelists, you may enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is also being recorded and will be shared after the event. Members of the press may be joining today's webinar. Next slide, please. A little bit about the Center. The Center for Progressive Reform harnesses the power of law and public policy to create a responsive government, a healthy environment, and a just society. The Center envisions a government that uses the full force of its power to curb climate change and ensure a sustainable environment, economic justice, and healthy workplaces and communities for all. Registrants will receive a link to a 2-minute survey at the end of this webinar. Please complete the survey to help us improve future webinars. Thanks again for joining us today. And let's welcome our presenters. Next slide, please. During this webinar, you'll hear from 3 leading voices. Rob Verchick, author of The Octopus in the Parking Garage, who will share insights on the systemic and grassroots solutions thriving despite political headwinds. Maggie Dewane, author of Haiku and Hope, 50 States of Climate Change, will share how creativity and outdoor recreation can build resilience and conversation around a changing climate. And Daniel Wildcat, director of the American Indian Studies Program and Environmental Research Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University, and author of On Indigenuity, Learning the Lessons of Mother Earth, and Red Alert, Saving the Planet with Indigenous Knowledge, will share perspectives and insights from Indigenous practices and experiences from working in the field. Next slide, please. Let's get right to it. We'll now start our Q&A. So folks, again, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We have some questions for our panelists and would also love to hear from you. So for all the panelists, when we talk about climate resilience, the definition can sometimes feel abstract. In your specific area of expertise, be it law, policy, creativity, recreation, or Indigenous knowledge, what is a concrete metric or sign that a community is truly becoming more resilient rather than just adapting temporarily? Big question to start.
Well, I don't want to hog the mic here, but Sophie, this is a really tough question, and I might kind of ease us into it because I think my response is actually quite a bit more abstract and intangible. And that's because where I come from, the communications side, I'm a communications director in my day job. And then the creative side, thinking about haiku poetry and having written about climate change. This is an overwhelming topic for most people, and the phrase climate anxiety is something that we're hearing more of these days, and it's really real. And climate resilience is the opposite side of that coin, I think, for me in this regard. So, how do you build resilience within yourself? How do you cope with that anxiety? And um, you're asking for concrete things. Well, we're all part of this fight, and we aren't going to be able to be a part of it if we aren't resilient internally. And so, how do you build resilience within yourself? Is this by taking action? Is this by making time in nature to fill your cup and remind yourself what you're fighting for? Is this by expressing yourself through art or music? And I think it's crucial that everyone feels empowered to act. Otherwise, we aren't going to get those other concrete steps, achievements, accomplishments that I'm sure Rob and Daniel are going to talk about. And I'll use myself as an example here. Because these past 10 months have been among the hardest that I have felt or experienced. And as I mentioned, in my day job, I am just responding and reacting to the myriad attacks on our wild lands, public lands, conservation, climate, and I've been exhausted. And um, there have been protests over weekends that I've wanted to attend, but I didn't. And I feel guilty saying that out loud to many people here online, but it was because my heart couldn't take it. That was the anxiety I was feeling. So instead, I went camping. I communed with the places I love and told them, I am working on it. I am sorry for what we are doing, and I am trying here. And there are so many of us who are trying, I promise you. And so resilience for me was that response to my anxiety. So ask yourself, how do you pick yourself up? And whatever that is, do it.
Thank you, Maggie. Rob or Daniel, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll weigh in here. So here's one of the challenges. Everything that Maggie said is right on target. This is a very complex problem. It's a global phenomenon, but it expresses itself uniquely in every different biome, ecosystem, place on the planet. The common denominator we know is water. Some people are going to have more water than they ever wanted. Some people are not going to have enough water to live, to survive. So rather than sort of, give you some kind of researcher's, metric or measurement of here's what success should look like. The work I've been doing is very much community engaged. It's about the people in a specific place, the knowledge, deep knowledge they have about a place. I think you gauge success by asking the community that you are working with, do you see success? Do you feel more resilient? What does resilience look like? I guess my way of responding to this is we know climate change doesn't have a one size fits all solution. And it doesn't have a one size fits all metric for how you can, in particular places, measure resilience. I think resilience is very much community grounded. It's resilience in place. That means the people, the place, the ecosystem. And so, I would argue that what we need today are researchers who have the knowledge, skill, and the ability to be able to engage peoples in places, listen to what their concerns are, the problems they are identifying, and they will help us researchers come up with an appropriate measure, for what resilience looks like. I couldn't agree more with the point Maggie made. Right now, resilience may be nothing more than feeling like there's some room for hope, for a better future for your children, your grandchildren, and we like to say within our indigenous communities, that 7 generations into the future. Right now, a lot of people are feeling like there's not much hope, and that is a problem.
I think Maggie and Daniel have it. I mean, you have to pay attention to communities and how people are feeling and what they want, and that's going to depend on different communities, obviously. One of the things from my past is I was in the Obama administration at the EPA working on climate resilience. And I mention this because when you're in an agency or at the government level, and particularly when you got money available, definitions become really important. And it's hard sometimes to say, oh, well, that's resilient and that isn't, right? And so one of the things that we started to look at, and this isn't by any stretch a definition for every situation, but it might help guide things, is that we often looked for programs, initiatives, projects in which there was some attention paid to future-oriented data as opposed to looking backwards to try to, prepare for last year's storm, but looking forwards. We looked to see if people were monitoring how well their work and their preparation was going, and if they were reviewing it in the future, because then if they reviewed it, they could say, oh, well, we did this well and we did this other thing not very well. And so an example that's more of an institutional example, but I think is interesting, is we have a huge problem right now with the power grid, as many people know, and our power grid is not prepared for all of the changes that storms and heat and floods are going to bring. And we've seen that on and on again. One thing, though, after Hurricane Sandy, is that because of some legal pressure, Con Ed was Consolidated Edison was charged with becoming more climate resilience in legal terms. And what that meant was they had to consult the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory at Columbia, and they had to say, okay, let's prepare for 28 inches of sea level rise in the next 50 years. Let's establish an upper heat range by 2080. They're integrating underground heat temperatures, from 2080. And they put this plan together for how their grid is going to survive these future projections. And then they revise it every few years when they get more information. And then they monitor it, they have to report it. And if they don't report it well, and if they're not being resilient in the ways that they've described in their agreement, they might not be able to change their rates, to raise their rates in order to fund some of the changes they want to make. So sometimes definitions are really important, particularly when you're talking about, legal structures and companies and large operations that you want to keep accountable. That's not to say that communities themselves shouldn't be defining their own issues and identifying their own issues. But, future-oriented data, monitoring and reviewing and then revising, those are things that companies have to do, and honestly, households should do too. And we can probably talk about that as well.
Thanks, everyone. And Maggie, thanks for answering that question in the chat. Kind of moving into the space of beyond discussion. So this conversation aims to do just that, right? Move toward a bit more towards solutions, at least. So for a student or activist seeking to make a real world impact, what is the single most important action they can take this week to bridge the gap between policy discussion and concrete community resilience? Again, another light topic for y'all.
I went first
Yeah.
last time, so it's one of you guys.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, yeah, thank you for the light topics. No, these are really good questions, and they're good because you have to think. You have to kind of, do an assessment of where you're at and your relationality and all of this. So I'll give you two answers. Here's the real quick answer. The real quick answer is recognize that no matter what you do, good or bad, it has a consequence. It's consequential in this larger environment. I think one of the things that everyone could do is to start really developing a mindfulness about in our everyday life, about our carbon footprint, about the water we use, about the food we eat, about our own health. And, we all know since Standing Rock, water is life, right? But unlike my relatives 200 years ago, who every morning would get up and in one of their first acts of everyday living, go to water, and in that process of going to the water, give thanks to the water for what it was giving them. How many of us in the kind of worlds we live turn on the shower in the morning, turn on the faucet, and say, thank you, water? We are so insulated, in some ways isolated, from from the natural world that we forget that we live in a world full of gifts. None of us had to fill out a credit application to come into this world. That first breath of life was a gift. We live, as my good friend Robin Wall Kimmerer would say, in a world of abundance, but we're told we live in a world of scarcity. Become mindful. And in your behavior, in your conduct, you can embody the change that we need to see. That was a short answer that turned into the long answer. So I'll stop right there.
I just want to pick up on that because I think that's wonderful. This idea of being mindful and thoughtful about things that you already use and that you already care about. So sometimes, I talk to students or people on that I meet on on a book tour or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people will say, well, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not interested in climate science or whatever, but I want to do something. And I say, well, find something that you do care about, right? So maybe maybe you care about children and playgrounds, maybe your teacher, something like that. And so then you can start saying, oh, well, when there's extreme heat, the slides get really hot and kids burn their legs, right?
Yeah.
Which is the thing. Or I have a grandmother, grandfather who goes to the bus stops and to take the bus, and she has to wait at the bus stop too long, and there's no shade cover.
Yeah.
Right. So all of a sudden you can say that's a climate issue. You didn't know it was. You thought it was about your grandmother. You thought it was about the school system, but it's actually a climate issue. And whether maybe you like wine, maybe you like let's say you like wine, and you're all of a sudden you're learning about what wineries might be closing or what wineries are in trouble because of climate change. And then when you have this learning, you can talk about it with people who care about the same thing. Oh, did you know this kind of wine in Italy is going to be more precious now, and that the workers are being laid off as a result of that? Then you can talk about it not in terms of like labor issues in Italy or climate change. You can talk about it in terms of something that you already really care about. And then the very last thing, so sort of learning, talking, and the very last thing is thinking about, well, what might you or you within a group be able to do that might affect some change, whether that's just trying to get a canopy over a bus stop, or a canopy over a playground, or thinking about deciding where you're going to get your wine, or what these sorts of things are. Because I think it's that it may not be mindfulness in the spiritual sense, but it's mindfulness, it's thoughtfulness in the sense of sort of understanding what's happening around you, and that we're all connected to that.
Man, well, now I'm glad I'm going third, because you guys really nailed it. And I think, Rob, what you're mentioning, find what you care about. That's your entry point. You don't have to care. I mean, you should care, but you don't have to be the expert in solar power. I certainly am not. I care about it, but I am leaving that to the solar experts. I care about wildlife protection. So how can I enter that world and be a voice for it? And then Daniel, with the mindfulness, I just think this is so relevant. And I want to build on that because, too, think about what you're consuming. And we don't just mean food, but we mean purchasing. So what's the source and story behind that wooden table that you just purchased? Or where did that seafood come from and how was it caught? Think about what went into the resources that we otherwise kind of take for granted. And you said something, Daniel, that I just thought was really poignant, and that is we have become so insulated, and I think most of us have really lost touch with the earth. And a story that really painted this for me a number of years ago, I was traveling in Bali and I was doing a climate story on rising seas. And I was just in the back of a taxi cab and I asked my driver, have you ever heard about climate change? Do you know what this is? And he said, no, I've never heard of it, but you're talking about the earth, right? And the planet. Well, I do think that we've lost touch with the planet. And I think that the earth has started to act up on us and it's getting angry. And then he went on to describe that Bali's largest volcano had started to bubble, and within a week's time, it actually erupted. And I thought, yeah, so there's someone who's paying attention, doesn't know about climate change, but sees that we have lost touch and we need to be more mindful and aware. And so I think both of you really nailed it. And so I'm just echoing these great points that you made. But for the sake of any listeners on here today who are like me and you're like, well, I really need something tangible. Can you give me an action? I need homework. I think first and foremost, what's happening in your town or community? Are there town hall meetings? Who are your local elected officials? Depending on where you live, these people go by different names. It might be a county commissioner, it might be a delegate, or you could look at your state representatives. Call them. What are they doing with regard to climate? Start there, and if they have an agenda or there's something about their plan that you agree with, schedule a town meeting or just voice your opinion, because these people are in office to represent you. And the more that your voice is heard, the more that they have to represent you. So those are things that you can do this week and just figure out who represents you, make some phone calls. Another thing that is kind of an easy lift is sign up for action alerts. There are so many groups out there that are trying to help you become an activist, whether that means you're a keyboard warrior and you're signing petitions, or they're helping you to write letters to the editor with your local newspaper. There are groups out there. Some of my favorites are the Climate Reality Project and 5 Calls. They make it easy for you to get started. So there are definitely tangible things you can do this week, but I think Rob and Daniel just said, we need to be more mindful and find your entry point that matters to you. Those are the biggest takeaways, I would say.
Thank you all. And this next question just sort of builds off of this, just kind of drawing it from the individual to the collective. Both creativity and Indigenous knowledge emphasize the importance of human connection to nature and to one another. In the context of building physical resilience against increasing climate disasters, how crucial is this sense of community and relational well-being, and what role does it play compared to, say, building seawalls or changing zoning laws? This is for all of y'all.
Oh, I think it's huge. Let me just so I'm here in New Orleans where I live, and I live on a street, and during Hurricane Katrina, this house was still here, and we were here, and there were 5 feet of water, whatever. People in the neighborhood around here who owned homes at the same time, they remember that really well. And I'm just going to give you 2 ways that you might imagine people adapting in some resilient way. One is money was made available, at one point for people to elevate their homes if they wanted to. And there are a few people on the street who elevated their homes 12 feet, literally up in the air, right? That, whatever, it protects them, but it doesn't protect anybody else in the community. And that's fine. I mean, it's their property. But it's not going to save the neighborhood or even, conserve a neighborhood after a heavy kind of a flood that anyone would want to still live in. You could have taken money like that. I'm not talking about individual people. I'm talking about the government. You could have had money like that and made it, developed it in a way so that it would have produced more protection for a community. And in fact, we do that ourselves in my community. We haven't, thankfully, had many hurricane evacuations certainly not in this particular season. But all the neighbors talk to one another, and they know the people who moved here more recently and don't know very much about hurricanes or storm surge. We watch out for one another. We talk about in our network about what hotels you might go to take dogs or cats, that kind of thing. I happen to have a generator for my house. When the power goes out, people in my neighborhood know that they can store their medicine in our refrigerator, or that they can come and sit by a spinning fan. And these things sound small, but it's about community, and you really have to know one another in order for that to work. And one of the things I worry about when we talk about, let's say, extreme heat in urban areas and stuff, are the people who often have the worst time are older people who don't know a lot of others in their neighborhoods. Their windows are all barred, closed. They're afraid of crime, these kinds of things, and nobody knows to look in on them. On my street, we know the people who are single, right? And there are people who look after them in terms of when there's extreme heat and things. And it's something that you kind of have to build, and it's very special when you get it. But I think we lose that, particularly in a society where people move around a lot.
I'm happy to jump in just with some thoughts because Sophie, you asked yet another very heavy question, but I think what it came down to was what role does community play? And community really is everything, just as Rob said. I think it could be just your familial community. It could be your neighborhood community that Rob is talking about. It could also be as big as your community of everybody who considers himself a nature lover. We have digital communities as well. And I think about the various communities I'm a part of and hold tightly to, and of the shared values that we have. And I'm lucky because in my day job, I work with like-minded people who believe in sharing this planet with all the life in it, plants, animals, insects, and they are going to get equally excited when I talk about having seen a praying mantis on my front stoop earlier today. I think about digital virtual communities that I am lucky to know exist. For example, there's one that I have shared with my father who is disabled. It's called Birdability, and it's a nonprofit dedicated to making the outdoors more accessible through the joys of birding. And this is one of the most wholesome and inclusive and welcoming groups. And there is a place for my father there to feel like he is a part of a community rather than isolated. So I think this answer is really just kind of circling back to how I started out answering your questions, Sophie, and that is about resilience. And this community and resilience, these are all part of empowering ourselves and feeling like we are not isolated in any of this as we try to move forward through a very existential time.
No, great responses. And based on that, I'll just take a sort of an example of what we're doing in the Rising Voices Changing Coast Convergence Science Research Hub, which I'm facilitating. It's an NSF funded grant, knock on wood, still funded at this moment. And, we've really we've taken an indigenous lens to the work that we're doing in convergence science. And building on this idea of community, I think one of the greatest lessons humans need to reacquaint themselves with is we really ought to begin defining a notion of practical community and governance, including the land, the air, the water, and the plants and animals. Those are the largest communities we humans are but one member of. And I think that is really an important point because, if you think about it, and this is perfectly consistent with modern biology, right? Is that we misspeak every time we talk about the world full of natural resources. The world isn't full of natural resources, folks. Just pick up any biology book today. It's full of natural relatives. We have kinship with the balance of creation. We don't have a legal system yet. We don't have policymakers who fully understand this. But I think that's really our challenge, is to begin to use every bit of energy we can to say, there's a reason we call this age, earth scientists now are saying we live in the age of the Anthropocene. It's because humans are literally changing some of the fundamental dynamics of the Earth's thin biosphere. Who's doing it? We are. And so far, guess what? The changes we've made have not been real good for the biological diversity of the planet, for the habitat the survival of unique habitats, water quality, air quality. We've got to move very quickly away from a notion of environmental justice being anthropocentric. It's not all about us, folks. It's about placing ourselves in right relations with that larger community we are a part of. And guess what? We got good work for everyone, for teachers, for innovators, for creators, for lawyers, for policymakers, because this is going to be a heavy lift. We're entangled in systems that are not really based on that kind of thinking. And yet I think, many of us, when we start talking this way, I see people nodding and things, you get it. We're entangled in systems that don't and aren't built, to kind of create that broader sense of community. So that's what I'd like to contribute to this community perspective. Let's remember, hey, community involves the land, the air, the water, the fish, the plants, and the animals. It's not all about us.
Thank you for that. Rob, did you have something you wanted to add, or were you just unmuted?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks, everyone. This is our last question for all the panelists. This webinar emphasizes building a just future. What is the biggest challenge you see in ensuring that the benefits and burdens of climate resilience strategies, for example, new infrastructure, relocation, resource management, are distributed equitably across different socioeconomic and racial groups? And what would be one solution to overcome it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to pick one example because, as Maggie reminded me, today is Marine Sanctuary Day. And some of you probably didn't know that. You may not know what a marine sanctuary is, but let's just say that in the United States, it's a type of an area, like a national park almost, where you designate an area of ocean and you say you're going to protect it in certain ways. This is one of the most important climate resilience issues around right now, particularly when we're talking about the non-human world, but certainly when we're talking about the human world. I'm writing a book on oceans right now, and I've spent a few times now in French Polynesia looking at different ways of protecting coral, for instance. So all of this is going to fit together. The UN has a goal. 190 countries signed a goal saying that they wanted to protect 30% of the ocean surface with the equivalent of marine sanctuaries, because that's how you're going to protect any of the seafood anywhere in the world, and all of the things that benefit human beings and the rest of the world. But we've had a really hard time putting those sanctuaries together, in part because local fisher folk in many places who are against that sort of thing, because that's what their living is based on. I was at a UN conference on the ocean in Nice just this June, and French Polynesia announced the largest, I'll call it, marine sanctuary in the history of the world. It's 5 million square kilometers. It will move our goal several percentage points to getting to that 30%. And it took over 10 years to figure out. And one of the reasons they couldn't get it figured out early is because nobody was involving the local populations and the communities. And what they ended up doing for 10 years is they worked with local indigenous groups, islanders, who had for centuries developed very small local village organized fishing rules. They would close certain fisheries on an island off, and then they'd open them up, and they'd close them again, and they'd rotate and move around. They were all very dynamic. And everybody, they've been doing this for hundreds of years. Everyone figured that this is finally a way to preserve fish and to preserve coral, which 25% of all of our seafood is based on coral in one way or another. And so this giant water park that I'm just telling you about was designed explicitly with, they call them rahuis, these small village local operations that deal with what they call artisanal fishing. And it's an amazing thing that they're doing in Indonesia and elsewhere. And although we're thinking very globally now in this particular example, the point is that you can't move the needle on these really big things unless you start with the smaller groups that are connected to it. And I fished with these folks. I've spearfished and dived with these folks and learned an incredible amount. And they're concerned about their livelihoods, but they're also, as Daniel says, they're very concerned with the entire ecosystem. You know, these are groups that have seen all of these plants and animals for centuries as parts of their family in one way or another. And that's 92% of the people in French Polynesia are in favor of this giant water park. Almost all of the water in the jurisdiction of French Polynesia is protected in this way. And you don't get that kind of buy-in unless you get it at the community value-based level.
Yeah,
and Daniel, you're in Kansas, so I'm glad that you're impressed by this. I used to live in Kansas City, so I know Haskell.
You bet. Well, you know, it's funny being right here in the heartland of the United States and then having this big research hub that's doing work in Hawaii, the Big Island, Huialohakihola. We're involved in supporting their whole fish pond agriculture regeneration effort. We're working 3 communities in Puerto Rico. The poster child of unfortunately climate change in Alaska, the barrier island of Shishmaref, you know, Louisiana. And so when I think about this, we've there's a couple of common denominators that we all recognize no matter where we are in the planet. And when we think about policy, we're really talking about our human, you know, engagement and our thinking and how we can hopefully improve situations. I think we should be all in right now on children. I think you brought it up, Robin. It's so true. I mean, the most vulnerable people to the extreme events that are going to be coming are the elderly and our children. And our children, I think right now, everyone should be all about children's health. Oh, that reminds me. So I'll put something in the chat. The Rising Voices Changing Coast Convergent Science Hub, housed here at Haskell, is going to do our 2nd annual Children's Health and Climate Change Symposium on the 13th and 14th of November. That site will take you to a place where you can register. You're all invited, okay? I think right now, if you want to get a good human community, you know, point of entree, let's talk about our children, the futures they're going to have, the kind of education they need, because we really need to be preparing them to face some incredible challenges. And they're not going to be prepared without that strong sense of self-worth, identity, confidence, and most importantly, love. You know, we may be the only NSF project that I know of that we talk about how in our work, we always lead with love. Love for the balance of creation, for our human relatives, for our more than or different than human relatives. And that's a big ask. But I would say one of the things, if we really want to start thinking about what is ahead of us, a focus right now on children, on their health, on their well-being, on their education, that is critical. So we've really put an investment. We're one of maybe not a lot of NSF scientific research projects have places for undergraduate education research and internships. We've built that into ours. So we are doing internships with tribal college students, with Haskell students, internships during the academic year, internships. And the idea is, we want to invest so that, our tribal communities won't have to be paying someone else for advice, but they can look to their own community members to come back as the experts to help them address the challenges they need. So this is an overall in policy, I think, this point of entry, when we think of our human relationality, children ought to be something we can all agree on. The importance of children, their health, their education, their welfare.
Now, I don't have anything eloquent to add, like Rob or Daniel just offered, except for perhaps a somewhat angry response. And that is, how do we make a more just and equitable future? And I think, Daniel, you mentioned this earlier. We need policymakers who are aware and who understand how entwined and interconnected we are, not only to the planet, but to everyone else. And if it were up to me, I would say let's vote out everybody who's not paying attention or who doesn't have this frame of mind to move forward. So my short and sweet answer is we need better policymakers.
Maggie, can I ask a quick question? Because we actually got a couple, we had some questions about the visual arts and art, and you're one of the things you're representing is literature today. What's the role of art in all of this? I mean, Daniel's talked about the spiritual side and the moral side. I'm talking
Yeah.
the wine side. What does art have to do with this? What's the power
Yeah,
there?
yeah. Are you trying to make me less angry so I can talk about creative
No,
expression,
no,
Robin?
because art can be famously angry, right?
No, you are entirely correct. And I think well, creative expression helps us to process our feelings and thoughts, and sometimes cope with heavy emotions. And that's actually what inspired my writing initially, well before my poetry turned into even the thought of a book. It was, I really have this deep love for our country and this land, its creatures, its people. And visiting every state, it's just, there is a striking individuality about it and it creates connection. And I love meeting somebody from Berea, Kentucky, and I have something to say to them, or meeting someone from Maine and I know everything about the mid-coast. That to me, it's creating this community, right? And poetry is a way to do that. Um, Poetry for me was this way to express this love. And then as a climate communicator, former journalist, the question struck me, what happens to these beautiful places if we don't act? And what's a way to galvanize the people of a state, show them their cherished home as it could be changed? But even taking a kind of a step back, because I'm just talking about poetry, and one of our questions you said is about visual arts. Um, it was Kurt Vonnegut who said, and I hope I get this right, the arts are a very human way of making life more bearable. And now, while I think the arts are a way to enrich life and there are mediums and means by which we can feel on top of the world and express all of our greatest joys, we're here today talking about climate change. And in that way, I think Vonnegut's onto something, right? There is art can help us to express that anger, that concern, that urgency. And I think there is such a place for it. So for all of the creative minds who might be on this call, what do you want to express and how? There is no right or wrong way to do it. That's something that I'm often trying to convey in my poetry workshops, actually, is somebody who says, "Well, I'm not a writer, I'm not a poet." I'm like, you don't need to be. You're human. You have thoughts. Like that's it. That's your entry point. Whatever that creation is, express yourself. So I think if you are creating just for yourself to process those feelings and thoughts, do it. If you are creating to share it with others, do it. And there is no right or wrong in that way. So that was a bit of a tangent, but completely emotive and whatnot.
That's such a perfect segue, both of you, because I was going to ask you, Maggie, in general, how does creative expression, but maybe more specifically the haiku in your book, how does that move people beyond fear or denial or other strong emotions, and motivate them towards actions, conversations with their communities, their neighbors? You touched on this a little bit, but if you want to expand, that'd be great.
Yeah, so for the folks on this call, I'm referencing my book because the point was of it to present each state and two other additional non-states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., what they represent in their natural landscapes. Haiku, the history of it, typically evocative of scenes of nature. So I wanted to show these beautiful scenes. So what is the creative expression, Sophie, to your question? It's to feel proud of what we have. And then I wrote a second haiku for each one, and that is a foreshadowing of what's at stake if we don't act. So you see your cherished home and something beautiful about it, and then, oh my gosh, this stark contrast, holy smokes. And certainly a haiku is only 17 syllables, so there's not a lot to play with, but I think that's the fun of it because poetry is it's subjective, it's open to interpretation. So if I can give just enough that piques your curiosity, or there's a word that really resonates with you because you are from Louisiana and you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say there is rhythm in the earth, then you have something to connect on and maybe you want to learn more. So that is kind of a little bit more, Sophie, to your question, is to why the haiku, why trying to reach people in a new way that I just hadn't seen done before, and hopefully interest people in joining the climate space and climate fight.
Thanks, Maggie, Rob, Daniel, feel free to weigh in on this, even though it's not specific to y'all. We're all artists in our own way, so feel free.
Oh, I think the arts are so important. I know I have some students on in the audience today, and they know that I sometimes read poetry to my classes. In some of my courses, we read novels, and I think it's incredibly important because it taps into the emotion the way that Maggie talks about, but it also and Kurt Vonnegut, I think, demonstrates this. Is writers, or let me say fiction writers, are the ones whose imaginations are most fertile and will go places that other people won't. And somebody like Kurt Vonnegut writes a lot about future types of societies or what could go wrong, and this whole area of utopias and dystopias started out among philosophers, and the way to imagine new ways of living, both good and bad, I think often comes through the creative arts, because people feel that they can explore ideas in, if you will, a safe way, right? By playing them out, and I think that's just an enormously rich area. I think we've got a questioner who's a budding lawyer. We'll talk about that too, I'm sure. But budding lawyers need art maybe more than anybody else.
Well, I tell you what, this is a great, and Maggie and Rob, you both proved my point. I mean, I think the best educators are people who have this creative capacity. We talk about, all the time in our work, talking story. And what we're doing that I think is really tapping into creativity is we are trying to put in our project media tools. And by the way, media, the tools that are available now in terms of cameras and the technology and what it takes to put on a fairly sophisticated podcast. I mean, you'd be surprised for how, inexpensive just getting that basic equipment can be. But it's not the equipment that makes it work. It's being able to tell a story. I would argue right now what we need in scientists, with engineers, with, creative inventors, we need good storytellers. People get drawn in to stories. And that's what we're really about. Everyone has a story to tell. The sad part is we live in a world where some people have been convinced they have nothing, no story to tell, or their story's not important, or no one's interested in. And I think that is one of the biggest falsehoods that we've got to challenge today. Every human, on this planet has a story to tell. And if we had the ability to sit and listen, they would make us better human beings because every one of them knows something I don't know because I'm not them. And I think this taps into that creative element. So I really like the idea of letting, young people be that catalyst in communities. People like me, I'm at the point now where if something goes wrong with my phone, I call my granddaughter, and my granddaughter, 10 years old, she can probably come over and fix it for me. And we need to take that technology and use it in a very powerful and good way. People tell me all the time, I'll end with this, okay? Because it's that light and dark side, right? People always tell me, well, I'm so sad that we lost the storytelling traditions. And I say, no, we haven't lost them, but they've been co-opted. So you take this out and you get those pop-ups. You're having stories told to you in 5, 10, 15-second bursts, but they're not being told to you anymore. They're being sold to you by corporations. What we need to do is to return the art of storytelling to having our family, our community share stories that are told to us, not sold to us. And that's good work. And it's gonna take all of us, to create that space, that place for that to happen. We're trying to just do a little of that in the RVCC Convergent Science Hub.
Thanks, Daniel. And while you have the mic, I do have, a little bit of a question, and I want to elevate all of y'all's specific work and your books. So, kind of in that vein, and you've given us many, but what's a critical lesson or practice from Indigenous knowledge that communities can apply right now to build more genuine and lasting climate resilience? And how can non-Indigenous communities appropriately integrate this wisdom? Again, you've given us much wisdom, but if you'd like to expand.
Okay, this is going to sound real simple, but it's really very challenging because we've talked a lot. This is the perfect segue. We've talked about storytelling. I think in the nature of the kind of environments that we live in now, and including these flat screen, environments that we're all entangled in, I think one of the greatest pieces of wisdom I have learned, and it took a long time. I had to kind of mature as a human being and go from being a young man all full of that anger and energy to realize this. Remember, the most important communication skill you need to develop is active, engaged listening. That means not always thinking about what that person's saying so I can think, oh, how can I, top that, or I want to add to this or that. But listening to what your family, your community, and I know Rob and Maggie will both appreciate this, a very Thoreau-like statement. He probably said it somewhere, but listening to the forest, listening to the mountains. They have a lot to teach us if we can get out of this anthropocentric mindset we have and step into that world of kinship that I think so many indigenous people on the planet still maintain. That's a piece of wisdom that I think everyone can work on trying to develop. How can we be better listeners in this world? You'd be surprised what you might hear once you really pay attention. That's it. I'm short and sweet.
Fantastic. And we also have some questions in the chat. I'm assuming the first question about being an environmental attorney was relevant to Rob's earlier point, and the second question there about effective ways to tell the stories of non-humans, perhaps Daniel. So y'all feel free to chime in on either of those, and anyone, feel free.
Let me just take the quick law professor question about for an aspiring environmental. Bless you for wanting to be an environmental lawyer and for working on that. The first thing I would say, the easy answer is do whatever your passion is, because you're going to be able to find, no matter what it is you're working on, some environmental or climate angle. But that's probably not the easy answer you wanted. So I'm going to say, water issues, depending on where you're living. I mean, Daniel's exactly right. Energy, I think, is another huge and diverse area. And I think climate resilience, preparing for disastrous impacts, preparing for climate impacts in one way or another. Those are three areas. There's lots of different kinds of legal work in those fields.
And a quick response to the question about how do you tell the stories of our, more than human relatives. Here is where I think, again, the arts is so important. And when I saw Maggie was going to be on this, I was so excited because, Rob's talked about, reading poetry in his classes. Believe it or not, now it's yet to be done. In fact, I was just thinking about this a couple of weeks ago. Every year in my class, when I'll come in and I'll just totally surprise students and I'll say, we're going to write a haiku. And we're going to write a haiku today about what you've experienced since you got up this morning and came to class. And then I have to give them a little lesson, about those powerful 17 syllables. Artists are the best at communicating, I think, the beauty, the wisdom, the power of that larger community we are a part of. So I'll hold that up. By the way, really good scientists understand this too. That's why probably E.O. Wilson was such a well-known and distinguished biologist. He knew how to tell a story, and we need more people engaged in storytelling, and the artists, the mediums you use, music, dance, art, poetry, literature, that is powerful. And you know what? It really resonates with people where, it can bring that spirit and reason dimension of who we are as humans together. And so I want to just give a shout out. I think the arts is a great way, to share those stories.
And I know we're close on time here, but I want to add to that question that was in the chat about telling these non-human stories, because this is actually what I do in my day job. I work for Defenders of Wildlife. And so we are constantly trying to figure out, how do we tell people that wildlife is important? And while we all get it, sometimes you have to make the connection to people and find an entry point that relates to them. And sometimes that entry point is the cardinal that they see in their backyard or the deer that they might see on the side of the road. But to Daniel's point, which I think is a really beautiful way to enter storytelling on behalf of our non-human kin, and that is, think about whatever art you do want to create and tell it from the perspective of that non-human kin. What might they be saying, thinking, doing? Because that's going to pull some attention. It's a new way of considering. And I think there are so many numerous ways to tell stories. And it's up to all of us. So thank you guys for being here today.
Thank
Sophie,
you.
back to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Rob, do you have any closing remarks? I know Daniel and Maggie got to chime in a little.
Well, I'll just say I mentioned I'm writing a book on oceans, and it's called "The Whale Who Danced the Blues." And the reason it's called that is what I'm trying to do is take a wonky story about protecting the ocean, and the backbone of the story involves the tale of a single whale named Tahlequah, an orca whale in the Salish Sea, who lost a calf and then carried it for over 1,000 miles. And it struck me as a super emotional story that I'm trying to do justice to, and to get people connected to that so that they can maybe see the other parts of the ocean that they might be concerned about. And so I'm learning an awful lot about that. And it's kind of an artistic journey in a way for me that's allowing me to explore a lot of ideas in a way that I don't normally do. So I'm very grateful to this sort of work that people do, and to the work that Maggie and Daniel are doing.
Thank you all. And thank you so much, Maggie, Daniel, Rob, for your time, energy, and effort in this panel. We appreciate y'all. And thank you to the folks who joined us today. Please expect a follow-up email from us in the coming days with all the links in the recording and links to these wonderful reads as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Take
Have
care.
a great day.
Thank you. Sunlight, sunlight, kayasate.